2008's Eden Lake is one of the cruelest films I've ever watched, and it's entirely by design. It's not necessarily the most graphic film, although it certainly doesn't shy away from gruesome, mean-spirited acts of violence and torture, but just through sheer scene-by-scene escalation, it is a relentless exercise in survival. Eden Lake tells the story of a young couple called Jenny and Steve who decide to take a weekend camping trip to the soon ironically titular Eden Lake, only to incidentally fall prey to a gang of youths led by an abnormally depraved psychopath called Brett. What ensues is an uncompromising nightmare where both Jenny and Steve are subjected to the worst string of bad luck imaginable as they attempt to escape the forest and find help before they're murdered by what are effectively just kids who are too deep into their crimes to turn back and face the consequences. I have genuinely, in all honesty, put off confronting this review for about 4 years now, because while I'm certainly desensitized to a lot of horror cinema, once in a blood red moon comes along a film that just finds a way to scar me on a fundamentally human level. Call me hyperbolic, call me dramatic, call me sensitive, even call me cliche, but if you need a solid reminder why the premise of what terrible, diabolical things humans can do to each other will always invariably impact us more than ghosts, goblins, demons, or anything of fiction, this is it. While there are many nastier works of cinema out there that I cannot even touch without this video immediately being demonetized and age restricted, in Britain, Eden Lake strikes a very particular cultural nerve. While it's not the most outlandish premise, it taps into an extremely complicated and controversial moral topic in British society that, despite being on the internet, I'm going to try and consolidate it as finely and respectfully as I can to give what I hope is a more vivid understanding of why this film has such a taboo aura around it. Look, let's be real here. When people often refer to Eden Lake, they mainly talk about its ending, which we will get to, but not for now. However, there is a lot that is set up in its first act that not only cements the tone of the film, but more notably calls direct attention to a mid-2000s subgenre that I briefly talked about in my video on Attack the Block, called hoodie horror. Now, I know what you're thinking, all that mud, sweat, rot, and humidity must produce an awful stench. I think we could use some delightful aromas to give us some levity, and that's why Scentbird is for you. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service on a mission to empower you to express yourself through scent. Look, I love a cheeky bottle of perfume, but my god are they expensive, and if you're anything like me, it's made more difficult when you don't want to commit to one scent for too long. That's the beauty of Scentbird. Each month you can select from over 900 unique fragrances without the risk of dropping over $300 on a full-size bottle and being left out of pocket. This allows you to experiment and find the fragrance that speaks to you, and Scentbird conveniently packages and delivers them in travel-sized vials worth a 30-day supply. This month, I've been using Matchbox Romance, St. Julep, Deep Water, and Sexual Steel. I'm especially fond of Deep Water for its fresh, woody forest feel with an air of sophistication, which is perfect for a night out with the fiancé, and Matchbox Romance for that fun, fruity vibrancy that reminds me of a summer holiday when I was a kid. I've always had a soft spot for scented stuff because it gives me that needed boost of energy, positivity, and confidence, especially as someone who deals with tremendous stress and anxiety on the regular. Simply scan the QR code or use Hollinger to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. You can get your first fragrance for just $8, and the next month will only be $16.95. Thank you to Scentbird for sponsoring this video. So, in the UK, and by extension even Ireland, hoodie horror was a niche but locally known subgenre that seemed to emerge as a response to the Broken Britain debacle that the UK Conservative Party propagated in the 2000s to fearmonger and criticise the then Labour government. The point of Broken Britain was to push across the narrative that crime, deviance, and social deprivation were rapidly taking over the UK like a disease, with poor parenting and poor education even being blamed as a cause for the decline in youth obedience. However, after the Conservative Party took over government in 2010, there was a notable resurgence in the topic in August 2011, when riots broke out across England in response to the controversial police shooting of Mark Dougan, leading to Conservative leader and then Prime Minister David Cameron to acutely describe the chaos as evidence of moral collapse in Britain. Now, the hoodie, or the chav if you want to get into obnoxious stereotypical labels, effectively became the visual scapegoating embodiment of what Britain, or let's not beat around the bush here, the middle class were made to fear. While it's an extremely complex and nuanced topic that I will be upfront and say I am no expert on, Jean Graham aptly summarised a fair bit of it in her article covering the surge of hoodie horror films in the UK around the mid to late 2000s, by quoting sociology professor Greg Fillo, who explained that the moral panic cultivated by hoodie subculture came from the negative perception imposed on their social class status by perpetual media attention and sensationalism. In fact, Lauren Stevenson made a similar observation as myself in her essay on Eden Lake by comparing it to US backwoods horror flicks, which themselves usually leaned on derogatory stereotypes about the deviant, sometimes so-called lesser cultured parts of America. The way I see it, Eden Lake is effectively this bastard child of Straw Dogs and Deliverance, which both released in the early 70s, which also happened to be in the midst of exploitation cinema, which dealt with subject matter typically around the outsider being under threat in a cultural ecosystem that is not their own. Look, there's no easy way around it. While many films are written from real empathetic places, there are those who criticize hoodie horror as basically classist, even if the intention might actually be the opposite. In the same way many people hold out-of-touch views on things they don't understand, one perspective sees hoodie horror as potentially perpetuating the misconception that working and lower-class people are the big bad problem, rather than addressing the real problem, which is them being victims of circumstance when economic and social policies do not do enough to support the challenges and disparity most everyday people face. Now, I'm not here to preach some sort of woke, moralist, self-righteous message or whatever it is the kids say these days. All I'm doing is presenting you with the baggage that comes along with a film like this, so don't shoot the messenger. Let me be clear, I think Eden Lake is an incredibly powerful and guttural horror film that I cannot recommend enough if you're looking for something to make you feel utterly depressed and angry. However, I think exploring the conflict behind its potential messaging makes for a more interesting, albeit very tense and divisive video, rather than just me talking about how Michael Fassbender gets tortured for 25 fucking minutes. I mean, we're still going to talk about that anyway, so brace yourself. Retrospectively, Eden Lake opens with tragic and disarming foreshadowing. The colours of Jenny's classroom are warm and vibrant, evoking the peace and happiness in her life, which we will soon never see again. The music, which notably bookends the film, is sombre, and her activity of having her class do peekaboo then remain silent until the bell goes, mirrors the eventual ending of what you can't see and don't say won't hurt you. For those unfamiliar with the film, this will sound obscure for now, but it will make sense in the end. For now though, our attention is placed on Jenny and Steve's travels to Eden Lake. The film is actually jarringly on the nose in its opening moments by calling attention to the theme of broken Britain, when a radio debate about deviance sees one side argue it's the parents' fault for failing to control their children, while the other argues welfare initiatives and interventions fail to support underprivileged areas of Britain. The film clearly wants to say something, but it crams such heavy material into such a brief moment, and even later goes on to highlight the impact of gentrification at supposedly bettering marginalized areas when Steve explains that Eden Lake will soon be paved over for a new luxury housing development. However, what's most starkly noticeable is how it contrasts the cultural differences of Jenny and Steve with the locals of Eden Lake. While it frames the couple as innocuous middle-class Londoners, when it comes to Steve, he arrogantly brags about his flashy new car with that rich wanker know-it-all attitude that would be any customer-facing employee's worst nightmare. He's not a dick per se, he's understandably just someone with limited tolerance given his own privilege, but this most notably comes to play when he remarks on the misbehavior of children and their negligent parents who have no problem hitting their child out in public, that only internalizes those toxic norms into said child and their inevitable trauma, as we'll see. However, here's the thing, everyone they meet in this town is aggressive to such a heightened level that I was half expecting it to reveal the town had drank from a poison well and were consumed by a rage virus or something. It's not necessarily unrealistic, I mean I can think of a few areas in my own town with antagonistic neighborhoods, but it eventually goes to such an extremity to make the town complicit in violence. It definitely shows its straw dog's outsider qualities in these early scenes, and makes for a tense and chilling atmosphere that only comes back to bite you on the ass, but while I'm no fan of the political commentator Owen Jones, sticking with what we've discussed, I kind of understand where he's coming from when he criticized the film in his book Chavs, The Demonization of the Working Class, where the film presents the town in an abnormally aggressive, cult-like fashion.
They punctured my back tire, I just thought parents might want to know.
Not my kids.
In fact, going back to gentrification, Jones notes how the film distinctly calls attention to how the luxury housing development is a gated community, prompting Jenny to ask, who are they so afraid of? And the film leaves you to point the finger at the class of people Steve has been mocking up to this point. Hell, just to hammer in the point in case you somehow missed it, crudely spray painted behind the sign it reads, "Fuck off yuppie bleeps."
Gated community, who are they so afraid of?
Everyone.
It's with this setup where I come to agree with Jones' line of questioning as to what this film is actually trying to say about its characters. Jones even attempted to add clarity to it by reaching out to writer-director James Watkins for an interview regarding the subject matter, but Watkins rejected with the response of wanting to leave the film up to interpretation, which I think is fair, but then it leaves the impression that you can view the film from the lens of an ignorantly distorted, overprivileged upper-middle-class snob's perception on the working class, especially when you consider Steve's own forward behavior that initially escalates the conflict despite Jenny's constant warnings and discouragement. We first meet our antagonists when Jenny and Steve attempt to enjoy a day at the lake, only for Brett and his gang to arrive and begin blasting their music, until Steve decides to condescendingly confront them for disturbing their day. Jenny does point out that the kids are just minding their own business and to let it go. Yes, they're being loud and boisterous, but they're not exactly hurting anyone, at least not yet. Now, the film does somewhat attempt to pose the question as to who started what, when Steve basically keeps poking at a hornet's nest every time the youths pop into his head rent-free, instead of just listening to his own philosophy that boys will be boys, when he hypocritically brushes off Jenny's concerns when they see the youths bullying a harmless kid called Adam. It's only when it directly affects Steve's privileged world does it suddenly become a problem, which is later symbolized when a fight over a pair of Ray-Bans is what causes the violence to suddenly erupt. But before that, the next day, the boiling point only continues to grow when Steve becomes angry at running over a broken bottle that slashes his tire, causing him to blame it on the youths even if it wasn't technically intentional on their part. His arrogance only continues to make matters worse when he returns to town and unconsciously and impulsively trespasses into Brett's abusive father's home when he notices their bikes outside, hoping to scorn them to their parents, prompting an awkward escape. Now, in my perspective, if Steve was actually caught in this scene, I could see how it establishes a conflict of misunderstanding and moral ambiguity by framing Steve as a potentially dangerous intruder in the eyes of the kids, who then retaliate by stealing his car the following night. However, instead of adding that point of contention, the kids only steal his car for no other reason than because they want to terrorize Steve and Jenny, while the trespassing scene is purely to set up Brett's violent father, who comes into play at the end of the film. I definitely don't think the film is trying to side with Steve and make it seem like his actions are justified, but because there's no real balanced sense of he said, she said, oh they started it, which is actually a point Jenny brings up at the very end of the film, it sort of does make it seem like the fault solely falls onto one party. Anyway, when Jenny and Steve find the car later that night, upon confronting Brett over a pair of Ray-Bans, one of the youths pulls a knife on Steve, who then defends himself, leading to an altercation that sees Brett's dog get killed, much to Steve's genuine remorse. From here, while the survival aspects and violence are of course incredibly harrowing, what keeps the film particularly compelling is the closer look we get at Brett and his commanding dominance over the gang. After failing to escape when their car crashes, flashes, Steve is pinned to a tree branch while Jenny is forced to run, soon finding a bloodied Steve the following morning, restrained with barbed wire and being tortured by Brett. It becomes, well, pretty clear at this point that Brett's barbaric behavior is on another psychotic level, and the rest of his gang seem to submit to him out of fear of receiving the same retaliation. Each of them are forced by Brett to mutilate Steve so that they're all equally implicated, while it's filmed by one member called Paige as blackmail in the event one of them was to speak out. What gives it an acute, savage perception is that it's approached like a cult committing a ritualistic blood pact of sorts, with one member even taking a similar sadistic pleasure in it, which, if I'm being nitpicky, I think kind of undermines the entire enigma around Brett being uniquely a psychopath. But regardless, once each of them takes turns to differing emotional dispositions, Brett finally demands the group kill Steve. Jenny manages to intervene by connecting to Steve's phone via Bluetooth to call the police, but the youths only catch on and chase her through the woods on BMX bikes, which she's somehow able to outrun, while Steve makes his own escape. The couple miraculously manage to find each other, only to face the heartbreaking reality that Steve's wounds are too deep as he succumbs to shock, all of which is made worse by the return of the tragic music when Jenny discovers an engagement ring. Echoing what I said in the beginning, it's obviously an understatement to say it's a very rough watch, but what takes it to another circle of hell is just how it constantly and relentlessly punctuates one bad thing after another. There is no respite, no levity. Immediately after Jenny leaves Steve to find help, her foot is punctured by debris, she falls violently down a hill, and just when you think, thank fuck, that innocent kid Adam from earlier, he can help, they got on well, the bastard rats her out. She's knocked unconscious and awakens tied to a makeshift bonfire next to her now dead boy. Oh wait, I mean fucking fiancé. While the rest of the gang are terrified, Brett is having the time of his life, and Jack O'Connell's performance truly cements him as one of the evilest children in cinema. I mean, I assume he's under 18, it's not exactly clear what age he is, but honestly, there's no point getting pedantic about it, because fucking hell, he's diabolical in any way, shape, or form. Brett then forces the innocent kid Adam to set the couple alight as an initiation into the gang, with Steve and the ropes going up in flames, soon allowing Jenny to once again escape. Oh, and just to put the poison rotting cherry on top, in retaliation for Jenny escaping, Brett burns the little boy alive. Hey, it's Ryan from the future here. I think we're at that point in the video where a wellness check might be in order, so I hope everyone's holding in okay at this point. Here's some footage of Cheddar just being a good dog as always. You may have seen him in some previous videos. We're nearly at the end, so that's a good sign. So just take this as a moment to breathe, think of good thoughts, and right, let's get to the fucking end of this. Battered, bruised, bloody, and basically covered in shit from hiding in a bin, Jenny finds an information station and attempts to seek a way back to town, but in the heat of the moment, while crafting a shiv with a shard of glass, she suddenly stabs the youngest kid, Cooper, fatally in the neck, despite only wanting to help her. The gang grow desperate in their search for Jenny, with Brett soon beating another reluctant member to death after he calls for help, prompting Paige to flee into the forest, and upon reaching a road, Jenny finally finds help, but that help is actually Cooper's older brother. Upon realizing this, Jenny steals his van and exits Eden Lake once and for all, running over Paige in understandable vengeance when she pops up on the road, with a final extended shot of Jenny's angry and traumatized expression as the music swells up, saying it all. Cut to credits. At least I wish it cut the credits. An exhausted and disorientated Jenny soon crashes a party back in town and awakens in the home of none other than Brett's father and surrounded by the other parents. What makes the ending so infamous is how it builds to Jenny's harrowing realization when she soon locks herself in the bathroom as the commotion outside transitions from confusion to shock to anger, with Brett's father soon kicking in the door as Brett coldly stares back at Jenny. In a moment of tangible fear and impulse, Jenny attacks Brett's father to defend herself, only fueling the parents' suspicions that Jenny and Steve are the real perpetrators from the lies the kid kids have told. Brett's father and the fearful adults around him mirror Brett's own relationship with his gang, as Brett's father decides to take matters into his own hands before the police arrive, perhaps calling back to the radio debates on poor parenting leading to poor upbringing, and thus crime and deviance. It accentuates the notion of a vicious cycle of abuse and violence, but not so much in an attempt to be empathetic, but rather to compound all that we discussed surrounding its ambiguous statement on culture, when Brett's father declares, "We look after our own," as if to evoke a form of tribalism. They drag a terrified Jenny into the bathroom as a frightened Brett is forced to go to his room, as Jenny's muffled screams can be heard in the background, where he deletes the video of Steve's torture and ends with him putting on Steve's Ray-Bans, an empty, worthless symbol of what escalated the conflict to violence. Inversely echoing Jenny's class in the opening, Brett remains quiet. He hides the emotion in his eyes with the glasses, only to then take them off, as though to embrace what he is. The light shines down from above, putting a shadow over his eyes. There is no remorse, no guilt, no care, no thought to what he did. He surrenders it all to the violent life he's only ever known. Hey, just a cheeky wee reminder that if you want to cheer yourself up and calm the nerves and warm the soul after watching that bleak monstrosity, you can check out Scentbird by scanning the QR code or using Hollinger to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Stay safe, stay fresh.